Sam&Cents. Money that finally makes sense. Somewhere right now there is a number that describes you and you did not write it. A lender keeps it. You are allowed to look at it. You are not allowed to hold the pen. Last time we took that number apart, what it measures, who built it, and the one question it was made to answer. Tonight, meet the person who refused to let anybody else keep the score at all. She did her own arithmetic, in her own hand, in a plain ledger she carried herself. And when her arithmetic and the room disagreed, she believed the arithmetic. For about 40 years the financial press treated that as a kind of madness. They printed cartoons of her. They gave her a nickname you have probably heard. And then the credit markets froze, and the people who had been laughing found out that she was the one with money to lend. So here is the question this whole episode runs on, and I am going to put the warning label on it before I tell you the story, not after. How does a woman the whole of New York is laughing at end up as the person New York's businesses come to when nobody else will lend? And this is the part that matters more. What should you actually take from that, and where should you stop? Because I want to be blunt with you now at the start. She was a professional financier operating at a scale with information and access that no ordinary person has ever had. This is not going to end with me telling you to hoard cash and wait for a crash. That is not a plan, and anybody selling it to you as one is selling you something. What she has to give you is smaller, quieter, and genuinely useful. 2 numbers and a reason to know them. She was born Henrietta Howland Robinson in 1834 in New Bedford, Massachusetts, a Quaker whaling town, which in that decade meant one of the richest places in America. Whale oil lit the country, her family owned ships, and the counting house that financed them. Now, the story people like to tell is that she was reading the financial pages aloud to her grandfather before she could properly reach the table, and the exact ages in that story get more charming every time it is retold, so I will give you only the part the record supports. By her teens, she was keeping the books, not watching somebody keep them, keeping them. She grew up understanding that a fortune is not a feeling about a family's standing, it is a column of figures that either adds up or does not. Her father and her aunt died within months of each other in the mid-1860s, and an enormous amount of money came to her. Except it mostly did not. Most of it came wrapped in a trust. She would receive the income from it for her lifetime, but the capital itself was held by trustees, and she could not direct it. Sit with how that would feel to somebody who had been keeping the books since she was a girl. She could read the accounts, she could see exactly what she would do differently, and a group of men she had not chosen held the pen. That is the second time in this story that somebody else is keeping her score, and it is the one that stung, because this time the number was her own family's money, so she fought it, and this is where her life turns. She produced an earlier will, one that left her the whole estate and voided anything signed later. The executors said the signature on it had been traced, and the trial that followed became genuinely famous because the estate brought in a Harvard mathematician to testify about probability. He compared the signatures stroke by stroke, and argued that the odds of 2 genuine signatures matching that precisely were effectively impossible. It is one of the first times mathematics walked into an American courtroom as evidence, and here is the thing almost nobody tells you, that is not what decided it. The court refused to hear her own testimony about her aunt, and without it her case collapsed. She lost, and no court ever found that she herself had forged anything, and no court cleared her either. That is the honest state of the record, and I am going to leave it exactly there, but whatever you make of it, look at what a 33-year-old woman learned that year. The numbers do not decide, the room decides. Now, because she is remembered as a miser, almost nobody can tell you what her actual job was. So let me tell you, she was not a saver. Saving is what you do with the edges of a salary. She was an operator. She bought government bonds and railroad bonds. She held mortgages on real property in New York and Boston and Chicago. And more than any of it, she lent money to companies, to developers, to people who needed cash faster than a bank committee could meet. She read the security herself, she priced it herself, and she wrote it in her own books. By the turn of the century, she was described in the press as one of the largest individual lenders in New York, not one of the largest savers. Lenders. That is a completely different animal, and the difference is the whole episode. Now she had married. Her husband was Edward Green, himself a wealthy man, and he traded the way most wealthy men of that era traded, on margin. Borrowed money, And in the panic of 1884, that caught him, the way it caught a great many people. Here is the part that mattered to her. They banked at the same house, and when that firm found itself in trouble over his debts, it would not release her securities, her bonds, her deeds, her property, sitting in a building whose troubles were not hers, being held against a loan she had not taken. She fought it. She paid what it took to get her property back, and she had the whole lot carted out and moved to another bank. And from that point, the arrangement of her life is unmistakable: separate accounts, separate affairs, and her husband on an allowance. The papers, who found the whole thing delicious, took to calling him Mr. Hetty Green, but strip away the comedy and look at what she actually learned that year, because it is the decision this entire episode turns on. It is not debt is bad. It is narrower and much more useful than that. Somebody else's borrowing can reach your assets if you leave them where it can. And where she moved it all to was, of all things, a desk. Not a firm, not a brass plate on a door, not a floor of clerks. A desk and a chair on the lobby floor of the Chemical National Bank, an institution she did not own. She carried her own papers. She kept her own accounts. Picture it properly: the marble, the columns, the men with private rooms upstairs, and a woman at a plain table against the wall doing more lending than most of them. And here is what that desk was protecting. In every panic of her lifetime, the people who were destroyed the same way. They had borrowed to buy, the loan was called, and they had to sell whatever they owned at whatever price that day happened to offer. That is what a panic actually does. It does not really punish being wrong, it punishes being obligated. And the thing that ruined them is the thing you never see her doing. She did not borrow to buy. So when the market turned, there was nobody who could pick up a telephone and make her sell anything. Hear that carefully, because it is not what it sounds like. That is a fact about her balance sheet, not a clever move she executed. She had not timed anything. She had arranged her affairs so that other people's panic was not automatically her emergency. And then 1893 happened. A genuine credit panic, banks failing across the country, railroads in receivership, and most importantly for our story, credit simply unavailable. Not expensive, unavailable. If you were a large business that needed cash that autumn, the ordinary machinery for getting it had stopped working. Which is a strange kind of moment, because the thing everybody needs is the thing almost nobody has. And in a moment like that, the question is not who is clever, the question is a very boring one: who still has money that is not already promised to somebody else? In August of 1893, a firm called Hilton, Hughes and Company was in exactly that position. They ran the great old Stewart store on Broadway, a landmark building, a serious business, and badly in need of money. And the person who lent it to them was Hetty Green, $1.25 million, secured by a 5-year mortgage on the building itself. The newspapers ran it as a headline because that was the shape of the thing. In the middle of a national credit panic, a woman the same newspapers drew as a hag was writing the check that a landmark New York business could not get anywhere else. And I want to stop the story right here and be very clear with you, because this is exactly the moment where a video like this one usually goes wrong. What you just watched is not a technique. $1 million secured mortgage on a Broadway building is not a transaction that has ever been available to a normal person in her century or in yours. She had the deal flow, the legal access, and the information to price that risk. You do not, and neither do I. And now the two things that keep this from being a hero story. First, it did not end in a triumph. Hilton, Hughes and Company failed 3 years later, in 1896. She was a secured lender, which means she was near the front of the queue, and the loan was ultimately repaid. She never took the building. That is what good lending actually looks like. Not a killing, just getting your money back from a deal that went wrong. Second, and less flattering, at the same period in her life she was living across the river in New Jersey, and in a string of modest lodgings in Brooklyn, and contemporary reports were entirely clear about why. She was staying outside the reach of New York's tax on personal property, the tax the city levied on holdings like stocks and bonds. So the woman lending into New York's crisis was also arranging her life to sit just outside New York's tax collector. Both of those are true at once. I am not going to smooth that over for you, and I am not offering it as a tip. So about that nickname. The press called her the Witch of Wall Street, and it stuck so hard that it is still the first thing most people know about her, and I want to be careful here, in both directions. The plain black dress was real, the modest rooms were real. She was, by any ordinary standard, extremely frugal, and there are 100 stories about it, The same coat for years, the cold meals, the endless small economies. Some of those stories are probably true, and almost none of them are separately sourced. They are the kind of thing that grows in the retelling. So the coverage did not invent her thrift. What it invented was the malice. A man who lived below his means and lent carefully in a panic would have been called shrewd or canny or a hard-headed businessman. She got which? Historians who have gone back through the coverage read it the way you would expect, as a story about a woman doing a man's job in public, told by men who found that funny and then unsettling. Right. So what is actually in this for you? Let me take away the wrong answer first, properly, not with a disclaimer. The wrong answer is, build up cash and wait for a crash to buy. Do not do that. And here is the mechanical reason, not the moral one. Her cash sat in an economy where prices were broadly falling, so money left alone tended to hold its value or gain it. Yours does not. Yours loses purchasing power every year it sits, which means an indefinite wait has a real and compounding cost that she was simply not paying. And on top of that, nobody has ever reliably demonstrated they can time the bottom of a panic, so please do not plan your life as though you can. What does transfer is the smaller thing, and it is the thing that actually made her. She was never forced. She could not be made to sell at the wrong moment, because she owed nobody the power to make her. So, the two numbers. First, your net worth. Everything you own minus everything you owe, on one line, with today's date on it. Some of that is an estimate, because the value of a house or a car is a guess, so watch the direction more than the figure. Second, your runway. How many months your liquid savings would cover your actual expenses if the income stopped tomorrow. Not a market position, just the number of months before somebody else starts making your decisions for you. One boundary plainly. This has been general financial education, not personalized advice, and what the right reserve is for you depends on your job, your dependents, and your obligations, not on a 19th century financier. Hetty Green died in 1916. She was called the richest woman in America, though nobody was actually measuring. Contemporary estimates of what she left ran upward of $100 million and disagreed wildly with each other because there was never an audit, only opinions. Which is a strange and rather perfect ending for her. The world spent 40 years keeping a number on her, in public from the outside, and getting it wrong. She spent 40 years keeping her own in a plain book and being right. And one last thing, because it is the part nobody tells you. Her daughter Sylvia inherited it, lived almost invisibly, and when she died in 1951 she gave nearly all of it away, to more than 60 colleges, hospitals and churches. The fortune was not squandered, it was given away to institutions, by a woman almost nobody had heard of. You will not get Hetty Green's deal flow, you can absolutely have her habit. Now, she was lending into an era that was, very shortly, going to find out what happens when it is not one firm that runs out of money but all of them at once, and no rule exists to save anybody. Next time, one man, a locked door, and the longest night in American banking. Same channel. So there it is, small boring moves that quietly win. If your money makes a little more sense now, hit subscribe to Sam&Cents. And the next one's right here, it picks up right where this leaves off. See you there.